Welcome back to Grim Reality Locks. I am the mysterious nomad. If you find comfort in the saddles and the stories that doors within them, make sure to hit the subscribe button tier on notifications to keep these louds open. Time we look through a lens that was never meant to be focused on us. There is a specific kind of silence that only exists in the deep woods. It is not the absence of sound, but rather a heavy, suffocating blanket of noise that your brain cannot quite translate. The rustle of alto owls and wet leaves, the distant crack of a branch under the weight of a healthy mist, and the low, rhythmic thrumming of rain on a thin roof. We tell ourselves that being alone in the wilderness is a way to find peace, a way to disconnect from the frantic energy of the modern world. But there is a reason our ancestors built walls. Here is a reason we feel the primitive urge to check the locks twice when the sun dips below the horizon. We think we are all alone, but the truth the woods are never empty. They are just waiting for us to close our eyes. I am a freelance video editor by trade, which means my life is mostly spent in dark rooms staring at glowing screens. By the time autumn rolled around last year, the walls of my small apartment felt like I had a backlog of three massive prep skips and a creeping sense of burnout that was starting to affect my physical health. I needed a bedroom. I needed a place where the only thing I had to worry about was the rendering progress barn the position of my next wish cravat. I am an amateur photographer, specifically obsessed with lens exposure, nice shots. There is something about capturing light the human eye cannot see that feels like uncovering a secret. I found a cabin on a specialized rental site for artists. It was located 3 hours north of Seattle, buried in a Yen's pocket of the Pacific Northwest. The photos showed a modern structure, mostly glass and dark cedar, perched on a slight incline overlooking a ravine. It was perfect. No cell service, no neighbors for at least 5 miles, and a deck that offered an unobstructed view of the northern sky. I packed my gear, which included my two primary SLR cameras, the LR cameras, two high-speed cards, and my heavy chivot. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, just as the sky was turning the color of a fresh breeze. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pyroxene. As I laid my bags, I felt the first sprinkle of use. You know the feeling. It is ideal as the base of your skull, a silent alarm bell telling you that you are being watched. I skinned the tree line, mud saw missing but the skilled fingers of the hemlock swaying in the wind. I lay tough atop a take of Freemason from City Noise till Tola Wise to listen. The cabin itself was beautiful but cold. It an open floor plan with a loft bedroom that looked down over the living area. The most striking feature was the floor-to-ceiling windows that made up the entire back wall. It felt less like a shelter and more like a display case. Once the sun went down, those windows became giant black mirrors, reflecting nothing but my own movement and the flickering light of the wood stove. By 10 p.m., I was exhausted. I had spent hours setting up my workstation and organizing my camera gear. I decided to set one of my cameras, a Mark V with a wide-angle lens, on the trapeze out on the deck. I wanted to capture the movement of the clouds over the rain throughout the night. I set the unit volume there to take one photo every 66 seconds, check the battery levels, and made sure the SCD card belonged space. I locked the sliding glass door, climbed the stairs to the loft and collapsed into bed. The slit I felt it was neat and dreamless, the kind of slit that feels more like losing consciousness than resting. But at some point in the early morning hours, maybe around 3 a.m., I woke up abruptly. The cabin was silent, save for the ticking of the heater. I felt the strange chill as if a window had been left open. I sat up, squinting into the darkness of the loft. Everything looked normal. My camera back was sitting on the chair at the bottom of the stair, right where I had left it. I checked the sliding door from the railing. It was still locked. I convinced myself it was dwarfed and went back to sleep. When he woke up at 8 a.m., the world was wrapped in a thick, gray fog. I made a pot of coffee and went out to the deck to retrieve my camera. The tripod was exactly where I had left it, but the camera body felt strongly warm to the touch. I figured it was just the internal battery working hard throughout the night. I took the camera back inside, sat down at my laptop, and popped the SD card of the writer. I scrolled through all the first images. They were exactly what I expected. The slow, ghostly movement of clouds, the swing of the trees in the moonlight, a stray owl crossing the frame at 12:14 a.m. It was beautiful work. But as I reached the end of the sequence, the images changed. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the camera was no longer facing the raven. The next photo in the sequence showed the wooden planks of the deck as if the camera had been tilted. In the photo after that, the fairing was blurry, a streak of gray and black. Someone had picked up the tripod. My heart began to hammer against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clicked to the next image. It was a shot of the sliding glass door from the outside. In the reflection of the glass, I could see a dark shape holding the camera, but the figure was obscured by the glare of the inner common light. I clicked Asian. The next photo was taken from inside a cave-in. The sliding door was open. My breath hitched in my throat. I knew for a fact I had locked the doors. I remember the click of the deadbolt. I scroll faster now, my hands shaking. The photos fell out a path. A shot of the kitchen counter. A shot of my boost by the door. And then the camera tilted up. The next 10 photos were of the loft. They were taken from the bottom of the stairs. In the center of the frame, bucked under the heavy wool blankets of the bed, was me. I was fast asleep, my face turned toward the wall. The person holding the camera had climbed the stair. The last 5 images on the card were all the same composition. A close-up of my hand on the pillow. The focus was shrubs, the depth of field shallow. The person had been standing less than 2 feet from my bed. They had stood there in the dark and waited for the intervalometer to click. One photo every 60 seconds. 5 minutes of someone standing over me while I slept, using my own equipment to document my vulnerability. I pushed back from the desk, so hard my chair toppled over. I scanned the room, looking for any sign of an intruder. The cabin was empty. The sliding door was closed and locked. I checked the windows, the well secure. There was no one here. But the photos were there on the screen. 500135642. I looked at the camera back on the chair. My second camera, the one I hadn't used yet, was still zipped inside. I opened the back with trembling fingers. The camera was there, but the lens cap was missing. I reached it through the backs and pulled something small and cold. It was the lens cap for my first camera, the one that had been on the deck. The person had just used my camera. They happened inside my bag. They happened in my space before I even went to bed. I wasn't just being watched. I was being curated. I stood there for a long time, staring at the back of my own head on the laptop screen. The image was crisp, the colors muted by the low light of the cabin, but the detail was undeniable. I could see the individual fibers of the wool blanket and the way my hair was mussed. It was a beautiful shot, technically speaking. The exposure was perfect. Whoever had taken it understood light. He understood my camera better than I did. My first instinct was to run. I went to grab my keys, jump into my car, and drive until I hit a gas station with bright fluorescent lights and people. But as I looked out the floor of the selling windows, the fog had thickened into a white wall. The raven was gone, replaced by a void. The driveway was a narrow ribbon of gravel that disappeared into the mist within 10 feet. I felt trapped. The cabin, which had felt like a sanctuary only 12 hours ago, now felt like a cage. I began to search the house. I started with the sliding glass door. I examined the lock, looking for scratch marks or signs of a foreign entry. Nothing. The seal was tight. I moved to the kitchen, checking the heavy wooden fonder. It was bolted from the inside. I checked every single window in the living area and the small bathroom. Every single one was locked and undisturbed. Tear way into the Skavenwa, peel about a key or sledgehammer. I went back to the loft. I know by the bed, looking for anything out of place. Apple print, a drop item, as in it wasn't mine. The floor was clean, the wood polished in coals. Buckton and I saw it. On the nightstand, right to where my head had been resting, was a small black object. I hid it above. It was the SD card for my second Ibera, the one that was supposed to be in my bag. I took the car back down to my laptop, my elective feeling tight, my breath coming in shallow hitches. I ejected the first card and slide the second one in. My hands were shaking so badly I had to wheeze both of them to guide the thin plastic into the slot. The folder opened. Tear was already on file. I clicked it. Image was taken from inside the camera back. It was dark, but the flash had gone off, illuminating the interior of the painted writers. In the center of the frame was a hand. It was a pale, long finger hand reaching the back toward the lens. The skin looked thin, almost translucent, like wet parchment. There were no rings, no scars, just toes and a verbally long finger. The timestamp on the photo was Ellen Farfy M. I had been in the living room then reading a book by the fire. This person had been in the same room as me, inches away from my feet, one wide way. They had been hiding in the shadows of the chair back, or perhaps behind the chair. I felt a wave of nature. I wasn't dealing with a simple break-in. This was Hamlin Ho live in the silence. Someone who can move the rhythm of the house. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a state of hypervigil purposes. I kept all the lights on, even though the gray daylight was still flowing through the fog. I moved my workstation to the center of the room, away from the windows. I kept my hunting knife, a gift from my favorite I usually only use in the only table, next to my mouse. I tried to call for help, but there was still no signal. I tried to use the landline in the kitchen, but when I laughed, there was sever. Just a low, rhythmic pulsing sound, like a heart mid-transmitted throw by connection. I hung up in the alley. As the sun began to set, the fear shifted from a sharp panic to a dull, heavy dread. I knew it couldn't leave in the fog the mountain roads were too darest, and he didn't want to be caught in a stalker in the middle of the woods. My only choice was to stay and defend the space. I decided to turn the hunt around. If this person wanted to take photos, I would give them a shot. I gathered all my gear. I had 3 cameras now, including an old backup I found in the bottom of my trunk. I set them up in the perimeter out aloft. I synchronized the interval limiters to trigger every 30 seconds. I didn't care about the battery life. I didn't care about the art. I wanted a record. I wanted to see the face of the person who was stalking me. I also did something else. I moved a Halby dresser in front of the loft stair. It wasn't much, but it would make noise if someone tried to climb up. I climbed into bed with my clothes on, my cloth under my pillow, and the remote shutter for the main camera clutched in my hand. I did think I would sleep. The adrenaline was a jaguar in my veins. I watched the shadows of the trees dance on the ceiling, listening to the house grow under the wine. The rain stood today in around midnight, a low, persistent drumming night drowned out the smallest sounds. I focused on the rhythmic click of the cameras. Click. 30 seconds. Click. 30 seconds. It was a mechanical heartbeat that kept me grounded. Mod exhaustion is a cruel master. Somewhere around 2 a.m., the stress of the day caught up to me. My eyes grew heavy. The clicking of the cameras began to blend with the sound of the rain, and he drifted off into a shallow, fitful sleep. I woke up at 4:15 am. I knew the exact time because the digital clock on the nightstand was the first thing I saw. The cabin was freezing. The fire had gone out, and the airful blight iced my skin. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The cameras weren't clicking anymore. I reached for the remote shutter in my hand. It was gone. I felt under the pillow for my knife. It was gone too. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I can hear the blood rushing in my ears. The dresser was still in front of the stairs. The windows was still dark. But as I looked toward the foot of the bed, I saw my main DSLR. It wasn't on the tripod anymore. It was sitting on the edge of the mattress. The lens pointed darkly at my face. The red light on the back of the camera was blinking. It was recording video. I didn't move. I felt like if I breathed, something would snap. I looked down at the floor, and that's when I saw the crawl space. In the corner of the loft, under a small rock I had moved, a wooden pile had been lifted. A dark square hole yawned in the floorboard. It led down into the space between the walls. I realized in that they weren't coming through the doors. They were already here. They had been here when I arrived. They were part of the architecture. I reached out a trembling hand and turned up the camera of the camera. I didn't want to see what had captured. I didn't want to know how long they had been sitting there, watching me sleep, holding the lens to my eye. But as he picked up the camera, the screen flickered to life, loud flags blamed the record video. It wasn't a shot of me. The camera had been turned about. The final frame was a high-resolution, wide-angle shot of the log. In the frame I was sitting up in bed, looking exactly as I did in the mummified, pale, and small. But behind me, rising up from the shadows of the headboard, was a figure. It was tall and possibly thin, and draped in a heavy, dark fabric that seemed to absorb the light. It had no face, just smooth, pale surface where features should be, and in its hands it was holding my hunting knife. The most terrifying part wasn't the figure. It was the fact that Encafoda was leaning down, whispering a pine to my ear. And as I sat there in the silence of the 4 AM darkness, I realized I could still feel the warmth of his spray. I stayed perfectly still. My muscles were locked in a state of tetany, my eyes wide and staring at the glowing screen of the camera. The red light continued to blink. Record. It was still recording. The weight of the presence by me was physical. It felt like the table like it needed either summy to ream. Alive was tucked in winter air the small wet comfort knoll for gulp from souls. I didn't turn around. I knew instinctively that if I turned around, the game would be over. The photographer was a creature of the periphery, something that taps in the shutter's click and the silver height of her memory. To look at it directly was to acknowledge its realities, and I wasn't ready to do that. I wasn't ready to see what those long, parchment-thin fingers why no ounce were no longer hidden scratch. He felt the mattress shift. It was a slight, elaborate movement, as if the thing behind me was leaning its weight forward, pressing closer to my spine. I caught feel the cold radiating through my shirt. The warmth of the breath I had felt a moment over was gone, replaced by a draft that seemed to come from now hard and everywhere. Very slowly, I moved my hand toward the camera. I didn't reach for the thumb at the center. My knife was gone, and I knew it was likely one of Toe's pale hands. I reached for the camera body. I needed to see more. I needed to understand the editing he had suspected earlier. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the casing. I gripped it and, with a sudden burst of frantic energy, I scrambled off the bed and tore the dresser I had moved in front of the stairs. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the figure standing on the mattress. I vaulted over the dresser, my boots clattering against the wood, and practically fell down the stairs into sight. I leaned hard on my shutter, the breath leaving my limbs in a sharp oomph, but I didn't stop. I scrambled toward the kitchen, toward the ollie or source in the cabin, the flickering glow of the stove's pilot light. I huddled under the kitchen island, clutching the camera to my chest like a talisman. I waited for the sound of footsteps. I waited for the dresser to be shoved for the creak of the floorboards. But there was nothing. The kitten returned to its heavy, suffocating silence. The rain continued its erratic assault on the roof, a million tiny hammers trying to break straight to the center single. I turned the camera back on. My hands were shaking so violently I idly dropped it. I navigated to the playback menu. I bypassed the video and went to the gallery. Here were new files. Files that shouldn't have been there. File 712. It was a photo of me, but not from tight. I was wearing a shirt I hadn't unpacked yet. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the very table I was hiding under, eating a meal I had prepared. The timestamp read tomorrow, 2 p.m. 5700 turn. A photo of the cabin from the outside. The fog was gone, replaced by a blinding white sun. But the cabin was different. The windows were bottomed with Ralph Lauren planks. My car, my silver sedan, was sitting in the driveway, but it was rusted, the tire splat, the glass shattered. The timestamp read 1 year from today. The terror I felt now was different from the fear of a physical intruder. This was a glitch. This was a fracture in the world. The camera wasn't capturing light, it was capturing the decay of time itself. Or perhaps the thing in the loft was using the camera to revive what was real. I scroll further. The photos became more abstract, more violent. Images of the woods where the trees were twisted, impossible, gimptious shapes. Images of the raven filled with thousands of discarded cameras, their lenses like unblinked eyes storing eye to sky. And then I reached the last photo. File 800. It was a photo of a single skirling on a wooden floor. The label on the card on Memorton on it in black marker. But the card was snapped in half. I looked down at the camera in my hands. The screen flickered. The image of the broken seas card began to distort, the pixels bleeding one another like wetting. A low electronic hum started to emanate from the camera's speakers. It grew louder and louder, piercing high-pitched whine that vibrated in my teeth. I tried to turn it off, but the power button was unresponsive. The screen was now a solid pulsing red. I realized that the photographer wasn't taking pictures of me. It was taking me. It was pulling my reality into the frame, one click at a time. Every photo I had found of myself sleeping, every shot of the cabin, was a piece of my life being digitized or archived at Pisek Ward. I had to gallery. Not out of the cabin, but out of the frame. I stood up, ignoring the pain in my shoulder. I ran to the front door and through the bolt. I yanked the handle, put it one butts. It was unlocked. It was as if the door had been painted onto the wall. There is no seam, no gap. I ran to the sliding glass door. The handle was gone. The glass was no longer glass, it was a code, hard surface, the fault like polished stone. I turned around to face the room. The cabin was changing. The furniture was missing its detail, becoming blocky and gray. The fire in the stove was a static image of a flame, frozen in time. The silence was now obsolete. Even the rain had stopped. I looked up at the loft. The figure was standing at the railing. It was no longer holding the knife. It was holding my second camera. I raised the device to where its face should have been. He saw the lens reflect the red glow of the kitchen's pilot light. I knew what was coming. The final frame. It didn't scream. I didn't bleed. I just stood there in the center of the dissolving room and watched as the figure's finger moved tiger the Clark by. Click! The wool went black. There was no sound, no sensation of falling. Just a void. I don't know how long it was in that darkness. It could have been seconds, or it could have been years. Time has no meaning when you find a folder. But then, a flicker of light. I opened my eyes. I was sitting in my car. The engine was idling. The hatter was bowing warm air onto my feet. I was parked at a gas station. The bright fluorescent lights of the Uber had to put sting in my eyes. The smell of gasoline and cheap coffee was the most beautiful thing I had ever experienced. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 3:15 p.m. on Tuesday, the day I was supposed to arrive to cabin. I looked into the rearview mirror. My face was pale, my eyes bloodshot. I reached for my chair back in the passenger seat. It was heavy. I unzipped it and reached it inside. My cameras were there, both of them. I pulled out the Mark V and checked the SD card slot. It was empty. I checked the second camera, also empty. I felt a surge of relief so profound I started to laugh. It was a dream. A vivid, terrifying, stress-induced hallucination brought on by burnout and the isolation of the upcoming trip. I wasn't being stalked. I wasn't being digited. I was tired. I pulled the car in and began to pull away from the palm. I decided then and there that I wasn't going to the cabin. I would drive back to Seattle, check into a hotel, and delete those reprivacy. My health was worth more than the commission. I reached it in my pocket to find my phone, wanting to call my sister and just hear a human voice. My fingers brushed it, something small and fold. I pulled it out. It was Anne Sugard. A black marker had been used to write my name on the label, and it was snipped in half. I looked at the passenger seat. My camera bag was sitting in there, but the zipper was now open. Inside the bag, the lens of my camera was pointed directly at me. And as I watched, the small bright light on the back began to blink. Recolored. I'm still driving. I haven't stopped for gas. I haven't looked in the mirror again. I can feel the fox roaming the roll and ever the highway, even to the sun with Simon just a moment ago. The road ahead is starting to look like a narrow ravine of gravel. I don't think I am on Highway 5 in Mere. I think I am back in the woods. And I can hear the clicking. One photo every 60 seconds. If you find a camera lot in the woods, or if you find a photo of yourself that you don't remember taking, don't look at the files. Don't try to understand the composition. Just run. Because once you are in the frame, the photographer never lets you go. If you want to keep these lags open, leave a like and subscribe to Grim Remelet Lags. Let me know in the comments which story kept you uptight. They say.